The rain fell in sheets that November afternoon, drumming against the black umbrella I held as I stood at the edge of my father's grave. I had flown 16 hours from Nairobi to make it to the funeral, my uniform still creased from being folded in my backpack, my boots mud-stained from the field hospital where I'd spent the last 3 years. I hadn't been home in almost a decade. Well, well. Look who decided to show up. My brother Marcus's voice cut through the sound of rain. He stood under a large golf umbrella with his wife, Diane, both dressed in expensive black attire that screamed money. Behind them, my sister Vanessa dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly stipend. I said nothing. What could I say? That I'd been saving lives in refugee camps while they'd been here, living off Dad's money? That I'd chosen purpose over comfort? They wouldn't understand. They never had. The service was brief and cold, much like our family had become after Mom died 15 years ago. Dad had remarried quickly, too quickly, my siblings said, to a woman named Patricia, who was only 10 years older than Marcus. She stood now at the head of the grave, weeping dramatically into a silk scarf. After the burial, we gathered at Dad's sprawling estate for the reception. I felt like a stranger in the house where I'd grown up. The walls had been repainted, the furniture replaced, every trace of my mother erased. Patricia had redecorated everything in gaudy gold and white, making it look like a hotel lobby rather than a home. Sarah, Vanessa approached me with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. You look so tired. I suppose it's what happens when you waste your medical degree playing Florence Nightingale in the third world. I bit my tongue. I'd expected this. Vanessa had always been petty, but grief had apparently sharpened her claws. Marcus joined us, scotch in hand. Dad's lawyer is here. He wants to read the will tomorrow. I assume you'll want to stick around for that? Though I can't imagine there's much in it for you. You did abandon him, after all. I didn't abandon anyone, I said quietly. I told Dad what I was doing. He understood. Understood? Marcus laughed bitterly. He understood that his youngest daughter would rather chase some savior complex than be here when he needed her. He had cancer, Sarah. For 2 years. Where were you? The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Oh, she doesn't know, Vanessa said with mock surprise. Sarah, darling, Dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. Stage 4. We've been taking care of him this whole time. Well, Marcus and I have. With Patricia, of course. I felt the room spin. He never told me. He never said. Maybe he knew you wouldn't come anyway, Marcus interrupted. You were always too busy saving strangers to care about your own family. I wanted to scream that I'd written every month, that I'd called whenever I could get satellite connection, that Dad had always said he was fine, that he was proud of me. But the words stuck in my throat. Had I been so blind? So selfish? Patricia swept over in a cloud of expensive perfume. Sarah, dear, so good of you to come. Your father spoke of you often. Her eyes were calculating, measuring. I'm sure tomorrow will be very interesting. Your father made some unusual decisions about his estate. The way she said it made my stomach clench, but before I could respond, she glided away to accept condolences from another guest. I spent the rest of the reception in a corner, nursing a glass of water and watching my family. Marcus held court like he owned the place already, discussing property values and investment portfolios with Dad's business associates. Vanessa showed off her diamond jewelry and talked about her latest vacation to the Maldives. Patricia played the grieving widow perfectly, though I noticed she checked her phone every few minutes and smiled at whatever she saw. As the evening wore on, I overheard snippets of conversation that made my blood run cold. Of course Marcus will inherit the business. Vanessa's getting the vacation properties. Poor Patricia, at least she'll get the life insurance. Nothing for Sarah, obviously. She hasn't contributed anything. I left early, driving to a hotel rather than staying in the house. I couldn't bear another minute of their judgment, their assumption that I'd come home looking for money. I hadn't. I'd come to say goodbye to my father, the man who used to take me to the Science Museum every Saturday, who'd been so proud when I got into medical school, who'd hugged me tight at the airport and told me to go change the world. That night, Lying in a sterile hotel room, I pulled out the small metal box I always kept with me. Inside was the medal I'd been awarded 6 months ago, the Humanitarian Service Medal for Exceptional Valor. I'd received it after our medical team had stayed behind during a rebel attack to evacuate patients, working through the night while bullets flew overhead. 3 doctors, 7 nurses, and 1 very stubborn surgeon, me, had saved 43 lives that night. Dad had known about it. I'd written to him, told him everything. He'd written back, one of his last letters, and his words had been proud. "You're doing what matters, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you different." But he'd been dying, and I hadn't known. Marcus was right about one thing. I hadn't been there when he needed me. I cried myself to sleep that night, something I hadn't done even in the worst moments in the refugee camps. The lawyer's office was everything I expected: dark wood, leather chairs, and the smell of old money. Marcus arrived in a Tesla, Vanessa in a Mercedes. Patricia wore a black designer dress and oversized sunglasses, even indoors. I came in my rental car, still wearing the same simple black dress from the funeral. "Nice of you to dress appropriately for once," Vanessa muttered as we took our seats. The lawyer, a silver-haired man named Robertson, had been Dad's attorney for 30 years. He looked tired as he arranged papers on his desk, and when his eyes met mine, there was something in them I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe, or concern. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this is a difficult time. Charles was a good friend as well as a client, and I'll miss him dearly." He paused, clearing his throat. "His will is somewhat complex, and there are specific instructions about how this meeting should proceed." "Let's just get on with it," Marcus said impatiently. "We all know how this goes. The business to me. The property's split between Vanessa and Patricia, some token amount to Sarah, if she's lucky." Mr. Chen's expression didn't change. "I'll read the will now. Please hold all questions until the end." The first part was standard: small bequests to long-time employees, donations to charities, that sort of thing. Then he got to the meat of it. "To my son Marcus, who has worked in my business for 15 years, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my collection of vintage cars." Marcus's face went red. "500,000? What about the business?" "The company's worth $50 million. Please, Mr. Thornton, let me continue," Mr. Chen said firmly. "To my daughter Vanessa, who has enriched my life with her presence, I leave the beach house in Malibu and a trust fund of $300,000. Vanessa gasped. "The beach house? That's it? What about the properties in Aspen and Miami?" "To my wife Patricia," Mr. Chen continued, "I leave our marital home and a sum of $2 million to be paid out over 10 years. Patricia's scream could probably be heard in the parking lot. $2 million? That's insane. I gave up everything for him. I'm entitled to at least half of everything." "You were married for 5 years, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken. "Shut up," Patricia shrieked. "You have no right to comment on anything. You weren't even here." Mr. Chen held up his hand. "There's more. Please, everyone, sit down." They did, reluctantly, all 3 of them looking like they wanted to murder someone, probably me, judging by the glares I was receiving. "The remainder of my estate," Mr. Chen read, his voice steady, "including all business holdings, real estate properties not previously mentioned, investment portfolios, and liquid assets, I leave to my daughter Sarah Marie Thornton." The silence that followed was deafening. Then chaos erupted. "That's impossible," Marcus roared, jumping to his feet. "She's been gone for 10 years. She doesn't deserve anything. This is fraud," Vanessa shrieked. "She must have manipulated him. Or forged it." Patricia was already on her phone, presumably calling her own lawyer. I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. The business? The properties? That had to be $40 million? 50? More? "I don't understand," I whispered. Mr. Chen looked at me with something like respect. "There's a letter. Your father left specific instructions that it should be read only if there were objections to the will. Given the current reaction, I think that condition has been met." He pulled out an envelope and broke the seal. "If you're reading this," he began, "it means my family is fighting, as I knew they would. So, let me be clear about my reasons. Marcus, my son, you have worked in my business, this is true. But you've also embezzled nearly $2 million over the past 5 years, thinking I didn't notice. I did. I have detailed records, which Mr. Chin will provide to you. The $500,000 I'm leaving you is approximately what you would have gotten after legal fees and restitution, should I choose to prosecute. Consider this your only inheritance and my final mercy. Marcus went white as a sheet. Vanessa, my dear daughter, you have visited me regularly, but only to ask for money. 37 times in the last 3 years, to be exact. I've given you over $800,000 to cover your emergencies, though I know most of it went to maintaining a lifestyle you cannot afford. The trust fund I'm leaving you is conditional on you seeking financial counseling. Perhaps you'll learn what Sarah already knows, that happiness doesn't come from a price tag. Vanessa was crying now, but they weren't tears of grief. Patricia, my dear wife, I married you in a moment of loneliness, and I won't say I didn't care for you. But I know about Richard. I've known for 6 months. I've known about the affair, about the plans you've made with him to contest my will, about the life insurance policy you try to take out on me without my knowledge. The $2 million I'm leaving you is generous, considering. Take it and build a life with Richard. Just know that if you contest this will, I've left instructions with Mr. Chun to release certain photographs and documents that would be embarrassing for you both. Patricia fled the room, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. Now to Sarah, Mr. Chin continued, and his voice softened. My brilliant daughter, my kind girl, the one who chose purpose over profit. You think I didn't know about the medal? About the lives you've saved? About the night you stayed in a collapsing building to evacuate children? I knew everything. I've followed your career with pride that words cannot express. Tears were streaming down my face now. I was angry when you left, I won't lie. I wanted you here, working with me, building the business. But your mother, God rest her soul, she would have been so proud of who you've become. You became a doctor to save lives, not to get rich. You went to the hardest places to help those who had nothing. You asked me for nothing but my blessing. So, I'm leaving you everything, Sarah, with one request. Use it to continue your work. Build hospitals, fund clinics, train doctors. My money, made through real estate and business, should do some real good in the world. You're the only one I trust to make that happen. To my other children, if you're angry, be angry at yourselves. You had every opportunity to show me you deserved this inheritance. Marcus, you chose theft. Vanessa, you chose greed. Patricia, you chose betrayal. Sarah chose sacrifice. The choice of who inherits was yours all along. Live well, my darling girl. Make me proud. You already have. Love always, Dad. The office was silent except for my quiet sobbing. Mr. Chin set the letter down gently. There's one more thing. Mr. Thornton also left instructions that should anyone contest this will, their inheritance would be revoked entirely and donated to charity. He was very clear about this. Marcus and Vanessa exchanged glances, calculating, weighing their options. Don't even think about it, Mr. Chin said coldly. I have the embezzlement records, Marcus. All of them. Offshore accounts, falsified invoices, everything. And Vanessa, your father also documented every loan he gave you, including the ones you claimed were gifts. You're getting more than you legally deserve. The week following the will reading was hell. Marcus hired 3 different lawyers before accepting that Dad's will was ironclad. Vanessa tried to appeal to family loyalty, calling me dozens of times a day until I blocked her number. Patricia gave an interview to a local newspaper painting herself as a victim, though the article mysteriously disappeared from their website after Mr. Chin made a phone call. I moved into Dad's estate, my estate now legally, though it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I spent the first few nights walking through the house at 3 a.m., looking at the life Dad had built, trying to understand when everything had fallen apart. In his study, I found the letters I'd sent him over the years. Every single one, carefully preserved in a leather binder. Next to them were printed emails, articles about my work that he'd saved, and a folder labeled Sarah's Achievements. Inside were newspaper clippings about the humanitarian medal ceremony, recommendations from the medical director in Nairobi, even a handwritten note from a patient's mother thanking me for saving her son's life. He'd been following everything. He'd known exactly what I was doing, and he'd been proud. I found his personal journals too, dated entries from the past 5 years. The cancer diagnosis, the chemotherapy, the pain, and through it all his thoughts about his children. March 15th, 2023. Marcus asked for a raise today. Not because he's earned it, but because his wife wants a bigger house. He doesn't know I've found the discrepancies in the accounts. Part of me wants to confront him, but what would it solve? He's my son, and I've failed him somehow. I gave him everything, and he learned to take more. June 3rd, 2023. Vanessa came by. She cried about her divorce, about how hard life is. I gave her $20,000. An hour later, I saw her Instagram post from a luxury spa. I'm enabling her, I know. But she's hurting, and I don't know how else to help. October 12th, 2023. Patricia thinks I don't know about her boyfriend. I'm dying, and she's planning her next marriage. I'm not even angry anymore. Just tired. Maybe I deserve this for marrying her in the first place. I was lonely and stupid. December 25th, 2023. Sarah called today on satellite phone from South Sudan. There was an outbreak of cholera in the camp. She's been working 18-hour days for 3 weeks. She sounded exhausted, but alive in a way my other children never have. She asked how I was. I lied. I told her everything was fine. I didn't want her to come home out of obligation. If she comes, I want it to be because she chooses to, not because she has to. January 8th, 2024. Updated my will today. Chin thinks I'm being too harsh, but he doesn't understand. I'm not punishing my children. I'm giving them what they actually deserve. Marcus gets enough to be comfortable if he's smart. Vanessa gets a chance to learn financial responsibility. Patricia gets paid off like the gold digger she is. And Sarah? Sarah gets the chance to change the world. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. He'd known he was dying, and he'd protected me from it. He'd let me stay in the field, doing the work I loved, while he handled his own mortality alone. I didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. The estate was worth $63 million. $63 million. The number was incomprehensible to me. I'd been living on $30,000 a year, sharing a tent with 2 other doctors, eating food that came from humanitarian aid packages. And now I was responsible for more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. The business was the biggest part of it, Thornton Development, a commercial real estate company that owned properties across the country. Marcus had been the COO, but according to the financial records Mr. Chin showed me, he'd been running it into the ground. Dad had been secretly managing things from his sickbed, making the actual decisions while Marcus took credit for the successes and blamed others for the failures. You don't have to keep him, Mr. Chin said during one of our meetings. You're the majority owner. You can restructure however you want. Fire my own brother? I asked. Fire the man who stole from your father's company and would have stolen from you, he corrected. There's a difference. He was right, but it didn't make it easier. I called a board meeting for the following Monday. Marcus showed up looking smug, probably thinking I'd be lost and confused, ready to let him run things while I played at being rich. He couldn't have been more wrong. I'd spent the previous week reading every financial report, every contract, every property assessment. I'd also made calls to some friends from medical school who'd gone into healthcare administration and medical real estate. I had a plan. Effective immediately, I announced to the board, I'm restructuring Thornton Development. Our primary focus will shift to medical facilities and affordable housing. I'm authorizing the sale of our luxury condo developments and commercial office buildings. The capital will be reinvested in building urgent care centers, community health clinics, and housing for healthcare workers. The board members stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Marcus laughed. You can't be serious. That's not profitable. We're a real estate company, not a charity. Healthcare real estate is a $30 billion industry, I countered. It's stable, recession-resistant, and there's massive demand. We'll be profitable. We just won't be obscenely profitable. And yes, Marcus, I'm serious. "The board will never approve this," he said confidently. I looked at the 12 people around the table. "Actually, as majority owner, I don't need board approval for restructuring. I'm informing you as a courtesy." I paused. "I'm also informing you that Marcus Thornton is being removed from his position as COO, effective immediately, due to financial irregularities that are currently under internal investigation." "You can't do this." Marcus jumped to his feet. "I'll sue." "You can certainly try," Mr. Chen said from his seat at the table. "But I should inform you that Ms. Thornton has already filed a report with the district attorney's office regarding the embezzlement. They're deciding whether to press charges. If you sue, all of this becomes public record. Your choice." Marcus went pale, then red, then grabbed his briefcase and stormed out. 3 board members followed him, loyal to the old regime. "Anyone else want to leave?" I asked the remaining 9. No one moved. "Good. Let's get to work." 6 months later, I stood in a muddy field in rural Georgia, watching construction crews break ground on what would become the first Thornton Community Health Center. It would offer primary care, dental services, mental health counseling, and a pharmacy, all on a sliding scale payment system. For many people in this underserved area, it would be the first real access to healthcare they'd ever had. "You're really doing it," said Dr. James Morrison, my old mentor from medical school. He'd agreed to come out of semi-retirement to help me plan the medical centers. "I didn't believe you at first. Thought you'd take the money and maybe donate some to charity. But you're actually rebuilding the whole damn company." "My father wanted it to do some good," I said. "I'm just following instructions." That was partly true, but it was also personal. The 6 months since Dad's death had been a journey through grief, guilt, and eventually, purpose. I'd realized that I didn't have to choose between the work I loved and honoring my father's legacy. I could do both. The restructuring of Thornton Development had been brutal. Half the staff quit in the first month, unable or unwilling to adapt to our new direction. We'd sold off 12 properties and used the capital to acquire land in underserved areas. I'd recruited a new management team, people with backgrounds in healthcare administration, affordable housing, and social enterprise. We weren't the most profitable real estate company anymore, but we were sustainable. More importantly, we were making a real difference. I'd also set up the Sarah Thornton Foundation, funded with $20 million from the estate. It provided scholarships for medical students from underprivileged backgrounds, grants for doctors working in humanitarian medicine, and funding for emergency medical services in crisis zones. 6 months later, I stood in a muddy field in rural Georgia, watching construction crews break ground on what would become the first Thornton Community Health Center. It would offer primary care, dental services, mental health counseling, and a pharmacy, all on a sliding scale payment system. For many people in this underserved area, it would be the first real access to healthcare they'd ever had. "You're really doing it," said Dr. James Morrison, my old mentor from medical school. He'd agreed to come out of semi-retirement to help me plan the medical centers. "I didn't believe you at first. Thought you'd take the money and maybe donate some to charity. But you're actually rebuilding the whole damn company." "My father wanted it to do some good," I said. "I'm just following instructions." That was partly true, but it was also personal. The 6 months since Dad's death had been a journey through grief, guilt, and eventually purpose. I'd realized that I didn't have to choose between the work I loved and honoring my father's legacy. I could do both. The restructuring of Thornton Development had been brutal. Half the staff quit in the first month, unable or unwilling to adapt to our new direction. We'd sold off 12 properties and used the capital to acquire land in underserved areas. I'd recruited a new management team, people with backgrounds in healthcare administration, affordable housing, and social enterprise. We weren't the most profitable real estate company anymore, but we were sustainable. More importantly, we were making a real difference. I'd also set up the Sarah Thornton Foundation, funded with $20 million from the estate. It provided scholarships for medical students from underprivileged backgrounds, grants for doctors working in humanitarian medicine, and funding for emergency medical services in crisis zones. Marcus had tried to sue, but his lawyers had advised him to drop it after the DA opened an official investigation. Last I heard, He'd taken his $500,000 and moved to Arizona, where he was working for someone else's real estate company. Vanessa had completed her financial counseling, mandatory for receiving her trust fund, and had apparently had an epiphany. She'd downsized her life, started a blog about overcoming spending addiction, and had even apologized to me in a long, tearful email. I'd responded. We were taking it slowly, but there was hope for rebuilding our relationship. Patricia had married Richard 3 months after Dad's funeral. I saw the announcement on social media. I didn't wish them ill. I just wished them away from me. The real surprise had been the medal. 2 months after taking over the company, I'd been contacted by a journalist writing a profile about humanitarian workers. She'd heard about the medal, about my work in East Africa, and about the unusual inheritance. Doctor becomes millionaire while saving lives, the headline had read, or something equally sensational. I declined the interview, but word had spread. Medical schools started inviting me to speak. Healthcare conferences wanted me on panels. The media loved the story, the selfless doctor who'd been rewarded for choosing purpose over profit. At first, I hated it. I didn't want to be a spokesperson or a symbol. I just wanted to work. But then I realized the platform could be useful. If people wanted to hear about humanitarian medicine, I could talk about the doctors still in the field. If they wanted to know about healthcare inequity, I could show them the communities we were serving. If they wanted to feel inspired, I could channel that into donations and support for the cause. The medal itself sat in my office now, next to a photo of Dad and me from when I was 10 years old. We were at the Science Museum, both grinning at the camera, my small hand in his large one. That was the father I remembered, the one who'd believed in me before I'd believed in myself. Ms. Thornton, my assistant, a sharp young woman named Keisha, approached with a tablet. The contractor has some questions about the second clinic in Mississippi. And you have a video call in 20 minutes with the team in Nairobi. They want to discuss the partnership with the government health ministry. I smiled. I'd maintained my connections in East Africa, and the foundation was now funding expansions of the very programs I'd worked in. I wasn't there in person anymore. I was needed here, building something sustainable, but I could support the people who were. Thanks, Keisha. Tell the contractor I'll be right there. As she walked away, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Sarah, it's Vanessa. I'm in Georgia for a work conference. Any chance you're free for coffee? I'd really like to talk. No expectations. Just, I miss my sister. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the safe distance I'd built. But another part, the part that sounded like Dad, reminded me that family was complicated, that people could change, that forgiveness was a process, not a destination. I'm at a construction site in Valdosta, I typed back. Free this evening if you want to drive down. Fair warning, I'll probably be covered in mud. Her response came immediately perfect. See you at 6. And Sarah? Thank you. I pocketed my phone and headed toward the contractor, my boots squelching in the red Georgia clay. Above me, the sky was clearing after a morning rain, and for the first time in months, I felt something like peace. Dad had left me more than money. He'd left me a purpose, a platform, and the freedom to use both however I saw fit. He'd also left me a challenge, to prove that wealth could be a tool for good, not just a trophy to be hoarded. I intended to spend the rest of my life meeting that challenge. 2 years after Dad's death, I found myself back in Nairobi, standing in front of the newly opened Thornton Medical Training Center. It was a beautiful facility, modern, well-equipped, and staffed by some of the best medical educators in East Africa. It would train local doctors, nurses, and midwives, providing free education to those who committed to serving in rural or underserved communities. Dr. Amani, the woman who'd supervised my work in the refugee camps, stood beside me. She'd aged in the years since I'd left, more gray in her hair, deeper lines around her eyes. But her smile was the same. You've come a long way from the exhausted resident who showed up in my camp 5 years ago, she said. I had a good teacher, I replied, and an unexpected inheritance. She looked at the building, at the students already arriving for orientation. Your father would be proud, not because of the money, but because of what you've done with it. We'd kept in touch over the years, and I'd told her everything about the will, the family drama, the restructuring of the company. She'd been my sounding board during the hardest decisions, reminding me why I'd become a doctor in the first place. Inside, the opening ceremony was everything I'd hoped for. The Minister of Health spoke about the partnership between the foundation and the government. Students shared their dreams of bringing healthcare to their home communities. And I presented the first Charles Thornton Memorial Scholarships, full rides for 10 students who demonstrated both academic excellence and commitment to humanitarian medicine. One of the recipients was a young woman named Naima, who'd been a patient in the refugee camp where I'd worked. She'd lost her family in the violence, but had survived and thrived, determined to become a doctor herself. When I handed her the scholarship certificate, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Now I'm going to save others. Just like you." That's when I finally understood what Dad had been trying to tell me in his letter. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the ripple effect of choosing purpose over profit, of using resources to empower others, of building something that would outlast us all. After the ceremony, I visited the refugee camp where I'd worked. It had changed, more permanent structures, better infrastructure. But the need was still overwhelming. Thousands of people still lived there, displaced by conflicts that seemed to have no end. I spent the afternoon in the medical clinic, working alongside the current staff. It felt right, like coming home. My hands remembered the work, the careful examinations, the quick diagnoses, the way to calm a frightened child while treating a wound. Dr. Sarah, a boy of about 8, ran up to me. I recognized him. Ahmed, one of the children I'd evacuated the night of the rebel attack. He'd been 3 then, burning with fever from malaria. He'd nearly died in my arms. Now he was healthy, grinning, and clutching a worn soccer ball. "You remember me?" he asked in Swahili. "Of course I do," I said, kneeling to his level. "You've grown so much. I'm going to be a doctor like you," he announced. "Mama says you saved my life. I want to save lives too." His mother appeared, a woman named Fatima who'd been a teacher before the war. "Dr. Sarah," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I heard you were here. I wanted to thank you. Because of you, my son has a future." These were the moments that mattered. Not the board meetings or the balance sheets. Not the headlines or the awards. This, a child alive and healthy, dreaming of his own future. This was why I'd left in the first place. This was what Dad's money was making possible on a larger scale. I spent a week in Kenya, visiting the programs the foundation supported, meeting with partners, and yes, working in clinics whenever I could. I'd learned to balance both roles, administrator and doctor, businesswoman and humanitarian. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. On my last night, Dr. Amani invited me to dinner at her home. Her family, 3 children, and a husband who taught at the university, welcomed me with the warmth that I'd missed in my own family for so long. Over a meal of ugali and sukuma wiki, her oldest daughter asked me, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving your home, your family, to come here?" I thought about Marcus, who I'd heard had started his own business and was slowly rebuilding his reputation. About Vanessa, who'd become a fierce advocate for financial literacy and had even started speaking at colleges about overcoming privilege and addiction. About Patricia, who disappeared into her new life and had never contacted me again. I thought about Dad and the price he'd paid for success and the wisdom he'd finally found at the end. "No," I said honestly. "I don't regret it. Being here taught me who I wanted to be. And everything that happened after, the inheritance, the company, all of it, it gave me the tools to be that person on a scale I never imagined." "But you could have had all of that without leaving," Dr. Amani's husband pointed out. "You could have stayed, built your career in America, been with your family." "Could I?" I asked. If I'd stayed, I would have been the daughter my father and siblings expected me to be. I would have worked in a comfortable hospital, made good money, lived a safe life. There's nothing wrong with that. The world needs those doctors too. But I needed to know if I could handle the hard things, if I could make a difference when it really mattered. The medal they gave me after the attack? That didn't make me brave. The work made me brave. Being here, seeing what these people endure, and still finding reasons to hope, that changed me. Dr. Amani raised her glass. To change, she said. And to your father, who gave you the foundation to build on. To Dad, I echoed. That night, alone in my hotel room, I pulled out the medal. I'd brought it with me, not for show, but as a reminder. The citation was engraved on the back, for extraordinary valor in the face of danger, for selfless service to those in need, for embodying the highest ideals of humanitarian medicine. Dad had read those words. He'd held this medal in his hands before he died. Mr. Chin had told me that he'd requested to see it one last time. I liked to think it had brought him peace, knowing that his daughter had found her calling, that she'd been recognized for her courage, that she'd become someone worth being proud of. The medal had changed the will, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented. It was proof that I'd meant what I said when I left, that I'd followed through, that I'd chosen purpose over comfort. But more than that, it had changed me. It reminded me on hard days why I was doing this, why I sat through boring board meetings and reviewed endless financial statements, why I dealt with contractors and architects and bureaucrats. Because every dollar I managed well, every property we developed, every clinic we opened, it all translated into lives saved, futures changed, hope restored. I returned to the United States with renewed energy. The Thornton Community Health Centers were expanding. We now had 8 locations open and 12 more in development. The company was thriving under its new model, proving that you could do well by doing good. And the foundation was supporting humanitarian workers across 3 continents. I'd also started teaching part-time at a medical school, sharing my experiences with the next generation of doctors. Some of them would choose comfortable careers, and that was fine. But a few, there were always a few, would catch fire with the same passion I'd felt. They'd ask questions about working abroad, about humanitarian medicine, about how to balance idealism with practical realities. Those students reminded me of myself at their age, hungry to make a difference, unsure how to start. The world needs doctors everywhere, I told them. In hospitals and clinics, in rich neighborhoods and poor ones, in your hometown, and in places you've never heard of. The question isn't whether you should go somewhere hard, it's whether you're willing to go where you're needed most, even when it's uncomfortable. One student asked, "How do you know where you're needed?" "You listen," I said. To your patients, to communities, to that voice inside that tells you there's more you could be doing. And then you show up. You do the work. You fail sometimes, you learn, you try again. That's all any of us can do. On the 2nd anniversary of Dad's death, I held a memorial service at his grave. Vanessa came, sober and dressed simply, holding a single white rose. She'd been clean from her shopping addiction for 18 months and had started working as a financial counselor herself, helping others who struggled with the same issues. Marcus came too, surprising me. We hadn't spoken much since the lawsuit threats, just occasional stilted emails about legal necessities. But he approached me after the service, hands in his pockets, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "Several, actually. For what I said at the funeral. For what I did to Dad's company. For being a terrible brother." I studied him carefully. "What changed?" "Losing everything," he said simply. "Having to build something from nothing, with my own hands, my own name. No shortcuts, no Dad's money to fall back on. It's humbling." He paused. "I heard about the health centers. About what you're doing with the company. Dad was right about you. He was right about all of us. We can't change the past," I said carefully. "No," he agreed. "But maybe we can do better going forward. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sarah. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see what you're doing, and I'm proud of you. And I think Dad would be too." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation. We didn't hug or cry or promise to be close again. But it was honest, and that mattered. After everyone left, I sat alone by Dad's grave, the medal in my hands. "I did it, Dad," I said softly. "I'm using the money the way you wanted. I'm building something that matters. And I'm still being a doctor, just in a different way now." The wind rustled through the trees, and I could almost hear his voice. I knew you would, sweetheart. I always knew. 3 months later, I received a letter from Naima, the scholarship recipient from Kenya. She'd completed her first semester with perfect grades and was volunteering at the refugee camp on weekends. You told me that one person can't save the world, she wrote, but one person can save one person, and that person can save another, and another. I'm learning to be that one person. Thank you for showing me how. I pinned her letter to my office wall, next to photos from all the health center openings, next to children's drawings sent from the camps, next to Dad's last letter to me. That evening, I had dinner with Vanessa at a small cafe near my office. She ordered sensibly, and we split the check, small things, but they represented the enormous changes she'd made. I've been thinking about going back to school, she said. Maybe getting a degree in social work or counseling. I want to help people the way you do. You already are, I told her. Everyone you help with financial counseling, everyone who reads your blog and realizes they're not alone, that's real impact, Vanessa. It's not building hospitals in Africa, she said with a wry smile. No, it's helping people here, in your community, with problems you understand personally. That's just as important. We all have different roles to play. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I was such a bitch to you. For years. I was jealous, I think. You always knew what you wanted, and you weren't afraid to go after it. I was just lost. You're not lost anymore, I said. As I drove home that night, through streets I'd grown up on but had felt like a stranger in, I realized they felt like home again. Not because of the buildings or the memories, but because I'd made peace with my choices. I'd left, and it had been the right thing to do. I'd come back, and that had been right too. Both things could be true. The next morning, I had a video call with the team in South Sudan. There was a crisis. Flooding had damaged one of the clinics we supported, and supplies were running low. They needed funding for repairs and medical equipment. Fast. How much? I asked. 300,000, maybe more, the director said apologetically. I know it's a lot. Approved, I said. I'll have the funds transferred today. And let's talk about building a more permanent structure that can withstand the rainy season better. Get me estimates. After the call, I sat back in my chair and looked around my office. The metal, the photos, the letters, the financial reports showing that we were profitable and sustainable, the architectural plans for 3 new health centers, the scholarship applications for the next round of awards. This was my inheritance, not just the money, but the responsibility to use it wisely, the opportunity to make a real difference, the chance to honor my father's legacy by becoming exactly who I was meant to be. They'd mocked me at the funeral for coming back empty-handed, for choosing service over wealth, for abandoning my family. They'd seen the mud on my boots and my rumpled clothes and assumed I'd failed. What they didn't see was that I'd come back with something far more valuable than money: purpose, proven courage, and the wisdom to know the difference between a life well lived and a life well funded. The medal hadn't just changed the will, it had validated every hard choice I'd made, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. It had shown my father, in his final days, that his daughter had become exactly what he'd hoped for: someone who used her gifts to help others, someone who measured success in lives saved rather than dollars earned, someone who understood that the greatest privilege is having the power to lift others up. And now, with the resources he'd left me, I could do exactly that, not just in refugee camps and crisis zones, but right here at home, in underserved communities that had been forgotten, in the gaps where healthcare should be but wasn't. I pulled up the plans for our next project, a mobile health clinic that would serve rural areas, bringing care directly to people who couldn't afford to travel to hospitals. It would be called the Charles Thornton Mobile Medical Unit, and it would be the first of many. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Amani. Ahmed just told me he wants to go to medical school at the Thornton Center when he's old enough. You're building a legacy, Sarah. Be proud. I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed. We're building it together. All of us. That's the whole point. Because that was the truth Dad had finally understood. The lesson he'd tried to teach my siblings and me through his will. Wealth alone means nothing. It's what you do with it, who you help with it, what you build with it that matters. They'd mocked me for coming back empty-handed. But I'd come back with everything that mattered: purpose, compassion, courage, and a medal that proved I'd earned the right to change the world. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the money in my father's estate.